Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm David Mulder. I'm the training manager for the Navigate program, which is a co-sponsorship of ORSP and the Sponsored Programs Office. At the back table back there, we have Raquel DePaula-Silvius, who is our project manager, and Marianne Abraham, who is one of our technical writers. So we would also like to thank very much Heather for joining us today, and also we're very grateful that Snowmageddon did not hit one day earlier, because for those of you who don't know, Heather does work remotely, and so you're already going to have a challenge getting home. So Heather is the director of the Grants Review and Analysis Office in the medical school. And she's also very active with Ancora, so you may have seen her either in either one of those roles. And she has agreed to join us today to give us some pearls of wisdom about effort. If you haven't already, do please be sure to sign in on the sign-in sheet that's on the podium over there. And other than that, I will say hello and thank you for joining us to all of our live stream attendees. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Heather.
Thanks. I had to stand up here the whole time because I'm hooked at the microphone. Hi, as David said, I'm Heather. Nice to meet you all. Nice to see everybody at home. I'm looking forward to talk about effort today. Effort is one of those things that can be a little squirrely, if that's okay to say, and I like talking about effort a lot. We went really high tech. We have a Post-it note, but they gave me like 12 colors of markers. So I probably won't make it through all the colors, but if we do, that's just a bonus. So this is the high-techness today. So my background is, for those of you who haven't heard me say it before, I'm a musician by trade. Came into research administration because I needed to pay my rent. Anybody else in that same boat? Yeah, I'm a French horn player for orchestral playing. So, hey, you can do this too. So research administration is just something that once I started doing it, I just have a real passion for it. I like the fact that every day we're challenged as research administrators to do something new, and nothing is ever the same twice. So today we're actually going to talk about effort where everything is the same, and you're going to say, yeah, but that's not how it works because everything is different. So we'll also, I'm fine if you all want to ask, especially in the room, sorry folks at home, but if in the room you want to ask questions, I have no problem stopping, talking for a little bit, even saying, I don't know. So you might get that a little bit depending, because I will say the medical school, I'm going to start by saying the medical school is a bit different than some of the campus units because we have 12-month appointments, and on campus most of your appointments are 9-month plus summer, and summer can vary by school how long that is, and so we already, before we even start, have differentiation. So it'll be interesting as we go through and talk. But we'll talk about some underlying concepts and theory of effort first, and then see where we go from there. Is that okay? The more you talk, the better it is. I'll repeat stuff for the folks on the live stream if you have things, because I think when I talk into the microphone, it's also going through to you all there. So the first thing to know, and we did ask for some questions ahead of time, the first thing to know is that effort is how people spend their time, right? It's as simple as that. Effort is how people spend their time. And we, in the sponsored research world, are really interested in effort because we make promises to sponsors all the time about how we're going to spend our time and what we're going to do for them through the scope of work. And sometimes it's a contractual agreement, right? Sometimes when we say this person will have 20% effort, the sponsor expects they're going to have, whatever that means, 20% effort. So as we talk about it, we'll kind of tie back the concepts to research administration, but effort, just at the very basic part to start, is how someone spends their time. And so what I usually do, I draw pies. I like pies. Pie is good. It's lunchtime, right? Pie is good at lunch. So usually when we talk about effort, if you think about, I don't draw perfect pies, they're just reasonable pies. It can be an apple pie, it can be a pizza pie, whatever kind of pie you like. But the pie represents and some of you have heard me say this before, that when you work on things, 100% is 100%. Right? We have exceptions to that. I have to already put in the disclaimer, but basically for most people, 100% is 100%. So it doesn't matter if you have a 0.5 FTE. If you have a 0.5 FTE, your pie might be smaller. Or if you have a 1.0 FTE, your pie is bigger. But basically, you always get a round pie. Okay? And how you spend, and when I say you, it could be anyone. It could be how you spend your time as research administrators. It could be faculty. Lots of times we use the word faculty to include everyone. It can be research staff. Whoever it is, they have a pie. So everyone has a pie. And 100% is 100%. In the med school, we say there are no such things as overloads, right? The time, if you're exempt, and all our faculty are considered exempt, they have a singular pie. They don't get to have a pie plus an extra piece. There is no extra pie for anyone in the med school. Now, I'm very specifically saying med school because I know that other schools and colleges have HR processes that some faculty can go through to maybe be recognized for what university tends to call overloads. So if your school allows an extra piece of pie, you should talk to your main HR and department administrator types back at home about what that means. But in the med school, by and large, we do not have any extra pie. Okay? So I'm talking from mine. So 100% is 100%. And that's all there is to it. You can't say, I want extra. Now, what happens, though, if the faculty member says, well, I have faculty that work 40-hour weeks, and I have faculty that work 80-hour weeks. They have a 1.0, their pie is the same. And that doesn't seem very fair sometimes, right? Because if you're working literally, physically twice as much as someone else, shouldn't your pie look different than theirs? But really the pie is based on the FTE. It's a 1 FTE. And so what happens is if this FTE is equal to, say, a person that is working a 40-hour week and they start doing more stuff, and we'll talk for a minute about what stuff is, their pie actually just kind of, it's still a pie. They still get an extra piece, right? So they still just have a round circle. It's just a little bit bigger because the hours are more, you know, but it's still just a pie. And so we don't give them this extra piece. So how they spend their time. So what is stuff, right? Because that's a technical term. Do you all use stuff as the technical term? So faculty or staff doing stuff could be any different activity, right? So if someone is 100% on one grant, their whole pie is on that grant. But say they're working on 2 grants or 2 grants plus writing a grant or 2 grants, writing a grant for submission, and in my case, teaching or doing clinical time, you have to start dividing up the pie. And so because we don't let them claim extra time on their pie, we still have to show all of these different pieces, right? So these might be, oh, I can use more colors. How exciting. Okay. I don't know if you guys can see the colors up at the board, but we'll get copies of stuff eventually. Someone asked if I had handouts. I just talk. So we'll figure out later if we make handouts out of this. But a green piece of pie might be a sponsored project. A red piece of pie might be writing a new proposal, right? And then a blue piece of pie, the rest of it might be doing some educational training or teaching activities, something like that. And so everything has to equal one big pie. You see I keep coming back to the same kind of mantra on that. So you have the pie, and then you have to start talking about, well, we mentioned we would also talk about certification. So this is a good time to introduce certification as a concept. So how you spend your time at any given point is what your pie looks like. If you took all your pies for all the periods of the fiscal year of the university and averaged them out, it may not look just like your pie today, because how many people do the same thing every day, right? It might change. In 6 months, you might get this grant you applied for, might turn into a funded project, right? That happens sometimes. Sometimes it's harder than others, but you might for 6 months, have more pie devoted to sponsored research activities and less to doing administrative work of putting together a proposal. And so as things change during the year, you have to take all those pies and average them together for the university fiscal year, right? July 1 to June 30. And so that's what gets certified, is your average pie. Okay? Does that make sense? And the university requirements for certification are, if you work on a sponsored project, either on the main grant or on the cost-sharing account, you have to certify. If you work on more than one activity, so you've got both sponsored project work and education, or if you have education and clinical and no sponsored research, as long as you have at least 2 colors of pie, you have to certify. And that all of your different activities have to show up somewhere in your pie. Okay? And when you certify, any individual who has to certify is certifying as an average over those 12 months, this is how I spent my time. And so we ask that individuals certify for themselves at Michigan. That's because they have firsthand knowledge about what their pie looks like. They're the only ones that can really say, this is how my time was actually spent. I have not, and I've been here a really long time. And in all my time here, I've never certified for someone else. I've certified for myself, but never for someone else, because I'm not with them attached at the hip. David and I were attached at the hip due to microphone issues. So for that 3 minutes, I know exactly what David was doing, and I could certify what he was doing. I can't now, because I don't know what he's back there doing now. So because firsthand knowledge is so important, Michigan has taken the stance that it has to be certified by the individual who owns the pie. Okay? And then we got in a write-in question about, well, what happens with students that you can't find anymore, right? So they had their pie, they were here at the U, they left before the certification period. Students we asked to certify more regularly, because that way we can hopefully catch more of them. But what if someone leaves, or even a faculty member transfers to another institution, and they're no longer here during the certification period? You're supposed to track them down, like, bounty hunter time, right? Find them, get an email from them. If they can log into the system, still great. If they can't, get something in the email, and then talk to the cost reimbursement office. They oversee the certification process, and they can help you. And so the question was, well, what do we do if we've tried, we can't track them down, we don't know? That office will help you, and they will help you work through that certification process. But the goal is to, as much as we can, have everyone certified. So if you know someone's leaving, you can go in the HR system and print an as-needed certification report and review that with them before they go. You can also set up a plan for, hey, I'm going to be contacting you in a couple months and we're going to talk certification. But make sure that you know who's coming and going, because certification, and it may not be handled by you in your unit, right? Your HR folks are involved in this process. Certification impacts research administration at a high level, and I'll come back to reporting a bit later. But we're not always the ones responsible for it. We might be the ones who know who should be certifying, but a lot of us in our units aren't responsible. So that's kind of like us. We were talking about effort. We've now gone into a side bit on certification, right? Any questions so far? Because it's a lot. It's kind of like drinking out of a fire hose, I think. It's a lot of stuff to talk about. So you have your pie. Your investigator said, I need extra pie because I'm thinking all of these wonderful things and I am working at home on the weekend. The university doesn't own me then. Do y'all think that's true? What do you think? Good for you that you're working on the weekend. I once had a faculty member say, well, Heather, explain to me this. If I'm at home, and he had it was someone with a really large yard, and I'm on my riding mower and I'm mowing, and I am thinking about how to do my next research experiment. Shouldn't I get extra pie because I am doing this on my own time? I said, no, anytime you think about doing it, it's technically part of your pie. And if you want to tell me while you're mowing you're really working and you want to say that, your pie will just adjust, but we're not going to give you extra pie. And so it's really kind of a funny concept. And a long time ago, I think it's been about a decade now, the med school went through a huge process about how to deal with effort. And we came up with an actually more restrictive policy than campus about how to track effort. And we'll come back to what the university policy is in a bit. But they said, well, how do we solve for this? And my only idea was brain chips. And no one took that. Nobody wanted to have brain chips because people said it's really hard to talk about what this pie looks like. Right? Because everybody has a feel for how they spend their time, but they're not sure how they spend their time all the time. So we have the pie. There really aren't any nights and weekends, right? There's no nights and weekends. And we already talked about the fact that all of the activities have to show up, right? You have to account for the activity somehow. And so what the university says in their certification and effort policy is you should be reviewing this pie on a regular basis, and if there's ever a change for a piece of that pie of more than 5%, you should be making adjustments in the HR system to reflect that. Okay? If there's changes of more than 5%. Yes, sir?
So when you say a change greater than 5%, do you mean between individual projects or between activities like sponsored research versus teaching versus clinical?
That's a great question. So David's question, for those of you who couldn't hear him through the feed, was when the university says 5%, is that 5% of each sponsored project, or is it 5% of sponsored projects as a whole versus teaching as a whole, more of a mission-based 5%? It's actually for each item that you recorded in the HR system. But 5% is actually a lot, right? That's actually a large shift. And so if you see that your pie has shifted more than 5% when you talk to faculty, it should be changing. And again, your HR team might be the one driving the usual effort conversation, but in sponsored research, when these green pieces change, you're going to know before your HR folks. So this is a great place where you can have a partnership of talking about, hey, just so you know, Dr. So-and-so was supposed to work on the project 20%, and he now has told me he's working on it 25%. Do we need to adjust his effort? Okay? So having those conversations, you're more of a litmus test or a front line than you are necessarily responsible. But it, again, highly tied in research administration to what effort is. So there's that. Any other? David, does that answer? Okay, he gave me a thumbs up. I'm good. So one of the things now, we couldn't find any good walls to put tear-offs on. So I'm not sticking it to the piano because I said I'm a musician and I have too much respect for the piano. So for now, they're just going down here, and we'll figure out later if you want to see them, you can see them. They're not that exciting. They're just circles and pies. Let's talk about specifically in sponsored research. I'm introducing purple, newcomer. In sponsored research, what does it look like, and what are the impacts when you're dealing with specific grants? So one thing I have not mentioned yet, do you all know what I have not mentioned yet? Money. No one heard me say anything about money. And one of the questions we got is, I get confused because sometimes people say effort is money, and sometimes people say effort is time. Effort is time. How you pay for that time is money, okay? And we're going to talk a bit about money within the context of effort, but effort is time, how you spend your time, and money is how you pay for what you've done, okay? I just want to kind of throw that out there. It's one of the ones that came in. So, if I say RO1, do you know what that is? From the NIH, their basic, and the med school deals a lot with the NIH, their basic unit of award, their basic award type is an RO1. And we have someone who has an RO1, okay? And on the RO1 proposal, we'll start with the proposal first. They proposed as the PI, I'm going to say, I'm trying to think of a number that makes easy math. It'll probably not work out in my favor. They proposed, what I'm going to say is 20% effort. Now, federal agencies in the last 5 to 8 years have done us a huge favor. They've shifted from talking about percent of effort and gone to calendar months. I will tell you, I was so thankful for that. Because what does 20% mean? Right? We said everybody has a pie, and it comes out to 100%, right? But if you have a 1.0 FTE, that's 12, in my world, that's 12 months, right? I'm going to use a med school example because it's easier. 12 months, 20% of 12 months is what? Come on, guys, fast math. 2.4 calendar months, okay? But let's say that this is someone from a campus unit that has a 9-month appointment, and you tell the sponsor you're going to do 20% effort, only for the academic year. What is the academic year person going to do? 20% in 9 months, right? Which is 1.8. So the thing I love about the federal government is they took us from something that was a bit nebulous, right? You couldn't tell what size your pie was. If you have a graduate student that's a 0.5 FTE and they work 20%, what are you really telling the sponsor? But if you say, I've got someone working 2.4 calendar months or 1.8 calendar months, that's much easier to understand. And I think sometimes when we're talking with faculty or with staff that are paid off of grants, it's really helpful to do that conversion, right? Because 20% is not always equal, right? But discrete time, and it gets you back to, I'm pointing over here to the extra piece of pie. Who's going to tell you they can work more than 12 calendar months? Can anybody? I mean, now we're just like messing with the laws of physics, right? You can't do that. So using calendar months sometimes helps break down this whole conversation. So think about that as you try to talk about it with others. Because we easily say you owe 20%. But sometimes we don't really know what that means. So I'm going to leave the percent world for right now. But you have to then convert back to percent or else you can't get to a pie, right? It's hard to go back and forth. And so we promised 2.4 calendar months, which looks like, and if you don't believe this is 20% of a pie, it is. Just pretend I drew it the right size. Because I'm looking at it going, that doesn't look like 20%. But we'll just pretend it is. Okay, so the piece of pie is that. So let's talk about pay for a minute. What can you charge to the grant? So you proposed 20% and you were awarded the full amount, because that always happens. That was sarcasm. So how much are you going to charge to the grant? I can't hear, sorry? The actual amount, right? So you're going to take probably their full-time rate if they're a 1.0 FTE, or take their comp rate. You can't charge the government for risk payments. Those of you from the medical school who are not here hear that you cannot charge them for risk payments. But you can charge based on their base salary. And so you're going to charge the grant 20% of their pay, right? That's pretty straightforward. Let's say, though, that the grant didn't get funded at the full amount, because that happens all the time, but the investigator still insists they're working 2.4 calendar months, so 20%, and you only charge the grant for 15% of the effort. Is that okay? Ooh, I see quizzical looks. I like this. I hear, you have to be louder for me. It's boomy. Well, he told you he was working 20%, right? So you're getting into reductions, and we're going to go there next. I promise we'll go there next. But we're staying with the concept that they're working 2.4 calendar months, and you're only charging the grant. See, I did not do myself favors. For 1.8 calendar months, right? 15%. Are you allowed to do that? Don't know. I love that answer. Somebody said, I don't know. The answer is yes. You never have to charge the sponsor for the full amount of resources you're putting into the project. But will your unit be happy with you? Because you're supporting the faculty member and the department, right? What do you know? No, they won't be happy with you. That was very good. She went from I don't know to I know. The department then is responsible for this money. We call that cost sharing. Oh, see, there's that look. So anytime you promise the sponsor more and you're doing more, but you're not charging the sponsor for the whole thing, it's cost sharing, okay? Institutional investment, for those of you who want a fancy term for it.
You mean like department?
It could be departmental cost sharing, right? Department budgets.
University cost sharing.
No, local. No. Local funds that you decide to put into the project to offset the cost of the project. I'm not even saying who's putting in that money, but it's probably not someone on Central Campus, right? You more would not be happy with me if I told you all they'll pay for that, because they won't, right? Okay, so let's take a second piece of pie. Same concept, still 20% effort, and you decide to charge the grant 25%. Can you do that? Oh wait, sorry, I left out a really important piece of information. The investigator told you they were working 2.4 calendar months. Can you charge the grant for 25? No. What's that called? If we called this cost sharing, what's this one called? Fraud! It's exactly what it's called. Nicely done. Very nicely done. So anytime you have a promise with the sponsor, you're doing the work you promised the sponsor, and you charge the sponsor more, it's fraud. We don't want to do that. Wait, where's the red? I need red for that one. Right? This is a no-go. This is fraud. We don't want it. This U of M does not do this. Right? I just want to be clear what happens when you go over or go under for pay compared to effort. And in these examples, the effort has not changed. In a perfect world, where none of us live, but in a perfect world, if you have 20% effort, then the effort equals the dollars, and everyone's happy because the pie pieces are exactly the same size, right? But sometimes we run into this, right? You could cost share it, and we're going to get back to what you promised the sponsor now. If you promise the sponsor a certain amount of effort, you need to do that effort. Federal sponsors allow you to shave off that effort. I don't know how else to say that other than shave off. Because they say as long as you don't change by more than 25% of what you told us, right? I have to be careful how I say that. It's not 25% of your pie. It's you told us this much, and if you only work this 15%, which is right on the borderline. So let's say you're working 15.3%, just to have the math be good. Then you don't have to tell us. Why does the government set that threshold at 25%? Does anybody know? Why would they do that? Okay, hearing none, I will answer my own question. Not even any brave people to guess. Yes? Okay, the guess is the cost of processing exceeds it. That's not actually it. They don't care how much it costs us to process anything. They just want, for them? They think it's actually because they think it could indicate a change of scope. So when you have very specific individuals that they name in their award notice, and they say, we care about these people, right, when their names show up in the award notice, and in caring about those people, if their effort changes by more than 25% of what they were promised to the government, they think that could indicate a change of specific aims or scope. And they want the bells and whistles to go off, and they want to have conversations or a chance to have conversations about whether they're okay with changing the scope. Because it's their money, right? We sometimes forget it, but it really is their money. And so sometimes when we have this with federal projects, now I'm speaking specifically to federal because we have a rule for Fed, right, under uniform guidance. But for other sponsors, foundations, corporations, they may have rules written into your terms and conditions of award. So you have to read every single project's term and condition because you have to know what rules you have to live by, right? Their money, their rules. And so watch that in your award notices because you need to know, some might say, let me know if there's a change of 2%, right? Let me know, but the government says 25 in most cases. Some award notices, even from the government, have more restrictive rules, but generally, by and large, it's 25. So let's talk, what does that mean? So if you promise the government 20%, I think of it as kind of like taking a stick and putting it in the ground, right? I propose 20%, and I'm on sort of, some sort of, I don't know, expandable string off of that. How far can I go higher? This is higher for today, because, wait, for you, that's probably backwards, right? Higher. How far can I go higher than the 20% before the government cares? I'm still going. Now, You can go as high as you want, up to 100%. The government doesn't care if you do a lot of extra stuff, right? They don't care about that. They see it, and if you have the ability to rebudget for it, great. If you don't have the ability to rebudget for it, you're back to institutional investment, right? But the government does not care if your investigator works on that project until they reach their full-time 12 months or 9 months, whatever it is. The government cares from this stake in the ground on the expandable string going this way, how far? 25%. So if I promised them 20% and they made the award, in the award notice, even if the dollars were cut, if you don't have a discussion about it, what is still your promise with the government? 20%. So how far can I move before I have to talk to them? Where do I have to talk to them? 15%. That doesn't mean you can reduce it to 15%. It means you can go down to 15.1% without talking to them. But as soon as you try to get to 15, you're at that 25% threshold. And what do they expect you to do? They expect you to contact your program officer when? Before! Prior approval is the term, right? And I think that's also another big thing we kind of miss is sometimes the word prior means before, right? I know it sounds so silly when I say it. It totally sounds silly when I say it, but prior means before. How many of you have gone with prior approval? Retroactive prior approval. We do a lot of retroactive prior approval. And the appropriate way to get prior approval, you may have an initial conversation with your program officer just to kind of test the waters. I call it testing the waters. But then you officially ask for that through the university, through ORSP. You do your post-award change form, and you submit it to ORSP. They officially sign off for the university, and they send it off to officially ask. The government then has 30 days to respond. Hopefully they do. And then you get your answer, which is 3 months after the faculty member already started doing it, right? So if you find that the government someday says no, if the investigator has reduced their effort, right? We're not charging the grant, they reduce their effort, and then the government says no, it's the law of averages. They have to start working on it more to make it work back to where it was supposed to be, right? So let's see. So we're kind of all over the map now, right? This is why I like talking about effort. There's so many different ways you can go with effort. So what kind of questions does that bring up? Does everybody understand the idea that going negative, you can only go less than 25%? Going positive, you can go far as you want. You can charge a grant at any point, as long as the grant terms allow it, but you can't exceed what you are actually doing, right? So those are really important in research admin. So that's how the dollars relate to effort, okay? I'm looking at my notes. I'm cheating to make sure I hit. I have a bunch of circles drawn on a piece of paper. This is the key to everything. So I did want to go from, I'm from the med school, so I can favor med school people, right? I want to talk a little bit about the PHS salary cap. Do you all know what the PHS salary cap is? Do you all know what the NIH salary cap is? That is the wrong name for what it is. So it actually applies to all public health service entities. So the FDA, the CDC, the NIH, all the sister organizations, not just the NIH. But we all call it the NIH cap because a long time ago, I was working here, but a long time ago, it only applied to the NIH, and it has expanded since. So everybody got used to calling it the NIH cap. What happens for pay? Effort. Everything we've talked about for effort, because effort is how you spend your time, everything for that is still all the same when you're dealing with the agencies that have caps. And there are other places like some of the foundations also have caps on how much you can recover, things like that. What it does in your pie, just from a pay perspective, is it takes off the crust, right? We're in pie terms. So they're saying, depending how much the person makes, if their radius, right here, their pay, is, I'm going to say $200,000, then the NIH says you can't have that much. We don't recognize salaries, and they're changing it. They're in the process of changing it, right? But it was 187. It's now going up in the 189 range. we don't recognize anything over 189. So all of this, oh, I had black before for this. Here, wait. Sorry. All of this is now institutional investment. But do you see how it did not change the shape of my pie? My pie has not changed, but now the institution has to pay some of the money. That is your crust on your pie. And so what happens in our HR system is the effort stays the same and your distribution changes. Right? So now you might say my effort on this project is 20%, but the distribution might be, I'm making up numbers totally here. If you do go back and do the math, it won't work. But they might say the distribution is 18.7% distribution to the grant and 1.3% to a cap account. Okay? So know that when you're talking salary caps, you're not actually affecting your effort. And so when you sit down in post-award and you start talking about how do I budget with an investigator, and the investigator says, I want so much, I want 20% effort and that's worth this, you have to know to modify your budget because that then can't come off the grant. You can use that money for something else in the project. Okay? Crusts don't stay. I just made that up. I think it's kind of funny. Okay. Let's see. And we talked a lot about certification. So now that we've talked about what sponsors expect, and previous to that we talked about certification. Okay? Do you mind if I rip? Is that okay? I'm going from pies to lines, which is not nearly as exciting. When you report to a sponsor, some sponsors ask you to do annual reports to them. Tell them how the project's going, tell them how your money spend is going, and how your effort looks, right? And if you have that, I'm going to make up dates. Let's say it's a 10-1 start project. Oh, I guess it doesn't matter what year. They're asking you to talk about the time period. Oh, that was a mistake. 10-1 to 9:30. I need a sideways chart. This is not enough room for me. They're asking about this time frame. When someone certifies, they certify from 7-1, and that goes out because I didn't leave myself enough room to draw, to 6:30. Okay? And so what I just want to visually look at is the fact that it gets really confusing because when you are working on putting together some sort of report to the sponsor, you have to totally toss out the window anything going on in effort certification for campus because you're talking about two different time periods. And it might come out to the same number, happily coincidentally, and sometimes it just does not, right? So this project, let's say this is the last year of this orange project, okay? What happens is then when you're in the 7-1 through 6:30 time frame for the next year, this drops out. So you may not replace it with any sponsored funds. So you might certify that you did, I have to count my fingers, 3 months at 20% effort, right? But 3 months at 20% effort averaged over 12 months is going to look on the effort certification like a much smaller number, right? If you take it as a total percentage for the year. Now, our as-needed reports split up time periods so you can see that for that 3 months you had 20% on that project, and in future periods it didn't exist. But when you actually average over the full 12 months for the auditor's purposes, it's going to look like your effort on that project was really low. And that's another thing that's hard to kind of wrangle around when you're having conversations. So just know that. And if you ever need to use that, just sit down and really think about it and draw some pies and some pictures and some lines, and you'll be fine. Let's see. So what other things were you hoping to cover today? Yes?
I have a question.
Please.
So when your change project goes into a no-cost extension, because there's a square at the end of the class.
Right.
But then when you are final, are you meant to do effort reporting for the past 2 years?
Yes. So the question, for those that couldn't hear, the question is, if you have a no-cost time extension, what's the expectation that you report? NIH actually says a no-cost time extension just means additional time with no money. The award terms have not changed. And so you have to talk, I would suggest calling up the ORSP rep that you work with and talking to them, because we don't actually go in and say, NIH, please reduce my effort during the no cost, even if we're reducing our effort. And so sometimes your award notice says you must contribute 1.8 calendar months, because there's a couple awards that are very specific. And if you have to dedicate 1.8 months during the award period, well, your award period now is 24 months long, right? Because your no-cost extension gave you extended time. It didn't restart the clock. And you could still make that, make the argument that you made that commitment. When you start talking percentages, 20% of 24 months is very different than 2.4 calendar months over 24 months, right? So I think that's one that you really need to make sure you're talking to your ORSP rep to make sure that everybody's on the same page. I think there are some ways that we handle it on campus that are commonly accepted, but I'm trying very hard not to say it's okay to do, right? So if we talk about like career development awards specifically say in their award notice you must spend 75% of your time. So if you got a no-cost time extension, it's 75% of 2 years. It's not a 9 months over that 2 years. So I think you have to be really careful about which projects. I'm trying not to overgeneralize too much to answer you, if that's okay. Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay. So, I'm checking our time. We're at 1:15. What have I said today that was utterly confusing? Because I'm sure there was some. Does anybody want to go back and hit anything, or are we good for today? Yes, please.
What was the other name for the NIH cap?
Oh, the NIH cap. The other name is really the PHS cap. And I can go into a cool history of how that's set and the congressional language behind it. But it's set by Congress, and Congress every year in their budget appropriation indicates who the salary cap applies to. And when they say it's equal to an executive level. They don't have a dollar amount. So the language in the congressional law says the public health service is limited to paying salaries. No one can recover salaries at greater than executive level 2. And then you have to go out and find out what executive level 2 is. So it's public health service, and then the public health service includes NIH and all the sister agencies, which the examples I gave were CDC, FDA, SAMHSA, which is substance abuse, AHRQ, yeah. No, not DOD, not NSF. Those are not under the public health service. And so that's why it's a little confusing. It applies to some federal agencies, not to most. It applies to most we get our money from, but it doesn't actually apply to most federal agencies out there. So DOD, NSF, DOE, Department of Education, all of those have no salary cap. There is no congressional mandate for a salary cap on those particular agencies. Okay? I know, it's a little, every twist and turn. And somebody asked me, do you have handouts with all this? No, it's just all stuck in my head. So what else can I answer? Yes?
I'm very new here. This is
That's okay.
overwhelming.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's me. It's not you. In the little group that I'm part of now, they work on multiple different projects. So often, as happens in projects, the best laid plans, right?
Right. Can I repeat that much before you keep going? So I'm going to repeat chunks because I think it's more of a story. In the unit, they have folks that have multiple grants. I feel like another pie coming on. And best laid plans, they plan to do one thing, and then
how do you shift and make changes, because we're pretty much all grant funded, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your money is coming for this particular project for this particular person. They cannot do their work, and we don't have the ability to, at the last minute, kind of shift things around. So how does all of that, what are the strategies that you can do to kind of work things out?
Work things out. So the rest of the question was, if you have, because you must live in the land of milk and honey, you have many grants coming in, you have many opportunities to work on research for various funded, either sponsors or multiple awards from a sponsor, And how do you strategically work through how to spend that time and where to have the time be allocated, right?
Right, and especially like if everybody's going to work on this particular project in a particular month, and then the PI doesn't deliver like input deliverables so that the team can do the work, then what do? How do you recover from that sort of situation?
Okay, so it's actually the opposite of milk and honey. You have things lined up to work on, but you're not getting the input, so you actually can't work on it. Right. So I'm not feeling a pie anymore. I thought you were going one way and you went another. So I actually think that that's a lot of really honest conversations, right? Because you have to talk about, well, if you're not doing this now, is there any baseline work you can do to get ready for it, right? Prep work. And at least then you haven't lost that time. And this is where time does equal money, because if you're not working on that project, you can't be paid for work you haven't done, right? And all of a sudden we've turned into what was black stripey before, institutional investment, right? Or talking to them about, is there another project we can start ramping up while we're waiting for this other thing? And then is it feasible to pause that study, work on this one and go back? And you can look at that both at an individual level as well as a team level, right? Because different people on the team might be able to start work while other folks are just sort of hamstrung until things come in. I think there you're going to have to be having a lot of ongoing and real-time conversations trying to figure out, well, if you're not doing that, are you just searching the internet? Probably not. You're probably doing something, and getting them to articulate what they are doing as opposed to what they're not doing could be equally as important, and how they're spending their time. Because if you can be able to identify and match what they're doing to the specific aims of projects, right? And it all goes, everybody knows you can only charge things that match back to the specific aims or the scope. What you want to do is find those things they are doing, where they are spending their time, charge it appropriately to that particular source, and then you've used the money maybe sooner than you thought you were going to, right? You might have planned it in October, but now you're doing it in September because something else got delayed out. And it's a juggling match, right? How can you juggle so much? And so I think there you're into complex spreadsheets, trying to keep track of everybody, and lots of real-time conversation to really understand, and then deciding when's it appropriate to make HR changes, right? Because you don't have to change every week, right? You all hear that. It does not have to, just because you know they're not working on it this week doesn't mean you have to change it that week. We get into averages. And so as you take a look at that month, maybe they spent less time than they were going to, but maybe they did spend some time, and be able to start recovering that way. Does that help start to crack that? But I know, I can't tell you which one to pick, right? Because it depends what's going on. And I think that I'm going to go back to what I said before about the phrase firsthand knowledge. As research administrators, I'm going to say we should not be guessing how they're spending their time. Just like I said, don't certify for someone you don't know how they spent their time. Don't guess what they should have effort-wise. Talk to them. And if you have to talk to them by saying, and if they don't really know where to start, there's an easy way. You can start by saying, well, estimate how many hours a week you think you work on average. They don't like these questions, so you have to kind of keep it kind of calm and laid back. How much time do you think you work, and what activities are you doing? How much time are you spending? And then I see if it adds up to the same amount. Because if it doesn't, maybe they forgot they were doing something that you need to account for, because it's back to, one of the pies that's now attached to that table. You have to account for all activities, right? So if you're 100% paid on a project, you can't be putting a proposal together. Right? They don't work together because you can't charge one sponsor to put together a proposal. So make sure that you're always getting that firsthand knowledge, having discussions with either the faculty or the staff member to understand what they are doing, especially in the complex situations where things are changing on a regular basis. But know that you can then work with your HR folks to figure out when you need to make that HR change. But not more than 120 days, right? That's a whole nother topic. Okay, anything else? Otherwise, we'll let you go. All happy for now? Yes, ma'am. Okay, so and to clarify, the question was, what office do you work with? I'm going to rephrase your question. What office do you work with when there is someone who needs to certify and you can't find them through email, calling, whatever? That is the cost reimbursement office. They will not track down the people for you, just to be really clear. They will help you through the pathway of what you need to do if you can't find them. Okay? Just to kind of clarify what that was. All good? Well, thanks for, oh yeah, one more and then I'm going to stop talking.
Should we talk about concurrency?
You know what? Let's talk about that after just you and me. How's that? I'm not even going to repeat the question. You don't know what you're missing. So thank you guys very much for letting me talk and for being here and for being at home. So thank you.
Thank you, Heather. That's right. We're joined at the hip. So thank you, everyone, for coming. Oh, I feel a little brokenhearted. Thank you all for coming. Hope you learned as much as I did. Heather obviously has a great deal of expertise on this subject. A couple of shameless plugs before I let you all go. We do have registration open right now on the Navigate portal, both for the upcoming cohort of the fundamentals class, which is geared toward newer research administrators, so folks who have typically less than 2 years of experience as a research administrator. We also have 2 different sections of the uniform guidance class coming up. One will be here in Ann Arbor at Wolverine Tower. The other we're going to be offering on the Dearborn campus. So if you live potentially near the Dearborn campus or know of other folks who do or who actually work on Dearborn, please be sure to let them know about those opportunities as well. Most of you, it looks like, are already taking a second to fill out your evaluation form. Thank you for that. And I'm going to ask Raquel if I've forgotten anything. She's shaking her head no. All right. All right. Then I will say thank you to all of our folks out in the units who joined us. Hope you had a good time and learned something as well. And if we could all just give Heather another hand, and thank you very much, and travel safely.